Hello, this is Father Mike Walker of Father Mike's podcast, Father Mike's Bible Study podcast, and the Catholic Combine, the pastor of St. Cecilia Catholic Church in Beaverton, Oregon. If you would like more information about the parish or the podcast, please feel free to email me at frmikewalker@gmail.com. And now, today's podcast. So when I was in college, we had a professor who was there, and this one professor, he really bragged a lot. And he would go on and on about all these stories. He'd say, I was on the board of Microsoft, and I was on the board of GM, and I was on the board of General Dynamics. And he would go and he would just talk about all these, very important things that he did. And what was interesting about it is there weren't many things that were really verifiable. Because in the late 80s, they didn't have internet, and you really didn't know who was on the board of any of these things. And he always talked about it in the past, so you never really knew if what he was saying was true or not. But you just assumed that it was. Well, in my last year of college, I was working on my thesis, and I am in the office of the director of marketing for the university, and he receives a phone call, and I hear him talking on this phone call about this other professor, the one who brags a lot. And come to find out, he didn't do any of that stuff, that he was a con man. But his method is he would just kind of talk so over the top about everything that everyone just believed him. And he taught for at least 1 year and maybe 2 years before they found him out. And anyway, while the other head of marketing is talking about this, I'm like, is that? And he goes, yes. I was like, oh, wow. And he goes, you didn't hear any of this. But I remember thinking at the time, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you just make up, or Herod, or maybe Caiaphas, the high priest, or maybe the more religious people would say, well, there's Gamaliel, this famous rabbi. So they kind of gauged their level of importance based on worldly standards. And so now I ask this question. During that time, who would God think would be the most important person? It's kind of a trick question in a way. Well, of course you'd say Jesus, he's the Son of God, right? And so being the Son of God on earth, people often fail to recognize him for who he was because he was humble. But also Mary. Mary was a very important person, being the mother of Jesus, who was God, so she's the mother of God. And being sin, we're all equal when it comes to who we are as brothers and sisters. And this is sometimes a hard thing for us to live by. It might be one thing to intellectually understand that, but it's another thing to actually live by that standard. Because odds are there are things that we tend to think that, well, I'm better than this person, or I'm special, and we kind of like that sort of difference. But to truly be humble is to live according to the truth, which is how God sees us, and also how God sees everyone else. Right, so in the context of the last week, there was the shooting that happened in Minneapolis. And, of course, this became big news. And anytime you hear something like this, your initial thought is, it's like, how terrible, that something like this would happen. And I wish nothing like this would ever happen. And it is unmistakable evidence of evil. One area I want to discuss a little bit because it's the one area that I don't typically hear being discussed in these conversations. And the major reason why stuff like this happens is because of a lack of humility. And you might be thinking, what does humility have to do with this? Well, when it comes down to the shooter in this situation, he did not have an understanding of who he was as a child of God. He also didn't understand who everyone else was as children of God. And he certainly didn't live according to that standard. Rather, he was living by the worldly standard. And it's this idea of celebrity. And I need to be famous. And because of social media and because of many different cultural situations that we have today, people want to be famous or important to the extent that they're willing to do things like this so that they can have their name out there, or they can be famous, or they can be remembered. And it really is the downside of this social media and celebrity mindset, that someone would go to such an evil extreme so that he could be famous, even if he's not around to actually experience that. That's why if I were ever king, I would just say that anytime anything like this happens, the name will not go out anywhere. The description of what happened will not go out anywhere, so no one who does anything like this will ever become famous, even in a notorious way. But I'm not king, and it's just kind of the world we live in. So we have to do the best we can in that. But one of the things I think we can do is we can learn the lesson from this, and not just all those different areas I discussed and throwing in an anti-Christian, anti-Catholic bias that gets promoted, but really just our response should be a response of living the virtue of humility in the way that our Lord teaches it. Now, we have a great example of that actually in the gospel today, and it might just seem like a little parable that Jesus is using, but this was something that happened in his time. He went to a dinner at someone's house, and he saw everyone jockeying for the important place at the table. And he's just watching this and thinking they don't understand what God asks of us as people who live in humility. That we should not be living out our faith in a way that is trying to make ourselves special or better or more important than others. Rather, we should see ourselves for who we are and treat one another in a way that we want to be treated. You know, the whole golden rule. And so he uses this example of the important person getting brought low and the low person being brought high because God sees things differently than we do. But you notice it's action-based. And this is something I think that we can put into practice a little bit this week. And just think in your own lives, maybe these little things that we do where we want to be treated special or different or take advantage of a situation because of our position. And think, now, is this really the humble way to act? For example, when we're in traffic and we're kind of racing through the street trying to get in front of other people at their expense. Well, is that really humble living? Or when we think that, well, I want to be treated special in this particular retail environment or whatever it is that we think, you know, well, is that the humble way to live? Or when we're thinking like, I want to invite just all the important people to be with me and ignore the other people that would probably be your better friends anyway. My point in this is that humility is not just an ideal, but it's something that's played out in the way that we live and the way that we act, where we're not puffing ourselves up and trying to pretend we're someone we're not, but we're comfortable being who we are, and we're at peace with that. And we could just simply live out that and also look at the way that other people are according to how God sees them, so we don't get caught up in the worldly definition of these things, but we're able to be living out our faith in a way that's applied in an honest, real, and true way. And so I'll just leave you with maybe 3 things we can do this week. And the first one is, think of some simple actions we can do that demonstrate the humility that we should live. And then just do little things like that. Start practicing on that this week. The second is, try to really be praying about seeing yourself as God sees you. That you are his beloved son or his beloved daughter, you know, that we can see ourselves as God sees us. And then the last thing is, try to do our best to pray so that we can see others in the way that God sees them. If we are doing that, then we will avoid a lot of the problems that we see in the evil and the sinfulness, and we'll see that the lives of the saints and mirrored in Jesus and in Mary, a way of life that really is different than what we might see around us. But it's also something that brings us great joy and peace to be more like Christ and helps us to see the goodness and the beauty in the lives of others around us. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. May God bless you and be with you as you live out your faith and serve the Lord this week.